James Hartwell had built an empire worth billions, commanded boardrooms across 3 continents, and his name appeared on Forbes lists that lesser men only dreamed of reaching. But none of that mattered when he saw her there, 23 years later, selling roses on a street corner where his driver usually didn't even slow down. Because some encounters don't just change your day, they resurrect the man you thought you'd buried forever. The rain began as a whisper against the bulletproof windows of James's Bentley Mulsanne, each droplet catching the city lights like tears he hadn't shed in decades. He was reviewing the Nakamura acquisition papers, a deal that would add another $2 billion to his portfolio, when something made him look up from the documents that had consumed his attention. And there she was. His heart didn't just skip a beat, it performed a complete cardiac rebellion, hammering against his ribs with the desperate rhythm of a man drowning. The papers slipped from his fingers, floating to the floor like autumn leaves, but he couldn't tear his eyes away from the figure huddled beneath a tattered umbrella 30 feet away. "Stop the car." His voice came out as a whisper, barely audible over the purring engine. Marcus, his driver of 8 years, glanced in the rearview mirror. "Sir, I said stop the damn car." The profanity tore from his throat with an urgency that surprised even him. This was not the composed billionaire who negotiated the Hartwell merger without breaking a sweat. This was something primal, something raw that he thought he'd successfully suffocated under layers of success and carefully constructed indifference. The Bentley glided to a halt, its perfect engineering making the stop so smooth it felt like time itself had paused. Through the rain-streaked window, James studied the woman who once knew every secret hiding in the corners of his soul. Elena. She looked smaller than his memories painted her, more fragile, like a sparrow seeking shelter in a storm that never ends. Her dark hair, once lustrous as midnight silk, now hung limply around shoulders that seemed to carry the weight of every hard choice she'd ever made. But her hands were still graceful as they arranged the roses in their plastic buckets, still moving with that unconscious elegance that once made him believe in magic. He remembered those hands tracing patterns on his chest in the darkness of their shared studio apartment, promising forever with every gentle touch. He remembered them wiping tears from his face the night his father threw him out, calling him worthless, predicting he'd amount to nothing. He remembered them slipping away from his at the train station, choosing a different future while his heart shattered into pieces so small he was still finding fragments in unexpected moments. The businessman in him immediately began calculating. Designer suit, $8,000. Watch, $180,000. The car he was sitting in, $400,000. Elena's entire flower stand probably represented less money than he spent on lunch. The mathematics of their divergent paths should have felt like victory, but instead, they tasted like ashes in his mouth. "Sir?" Marcus's voice cut through his reverie. "Is everything all right?" Everything was all right. James wanted to laugh, but he was afraid if he started, he might never stop. Nothing had been all right for 23 years. He'd just been too busy building walls around the truth to notice the foundation crumbling beneath his feet. He watched Elena shiver as the rain intensified, her thin jacket offering about as much protection as wishful thinking. A businessman in an expensive coat hurried past without even glancing at her flowers, and something inside James's chest twisted with a pain so sharp it nearly doubled him over. This was the woman who believed in him when he had nothing but dreams and determination. The woman who worked double shifts at the diner so he could afford business school applications. The woman who whispered you're going to change the world into his hair on nights when doubt tried to convince him otherwise. And now she was here, selling flowers in the rain while he sat in a car worth more than most people's houses. The injustice of it cut deeper than any boardroom betrayal ever could. But what cut deepest of all was the question that had been haunting him since the moment he spotted her. What if the success he'd spent decades chasing was just an elaborate way of running from the only thing that ever truly mattered? His hand hovered over the door handle, trembling like a teenager's on prom night. 23 years of carefully constructed armor felt suddenly paper-thin. And he realized that all his billions, all his power, all his influence meant absolutely nothing if he was too much of a coward to cross 30 feet of wet pavement. But what if she didn't want to see him? What if she'd moved on, built a life that didn't include ghosts from her past? What ifs could paralyze him forever? But then Elena looked up, and even through the rain and the distance, her eyes found his with the same magnetic certainty that once drew them together across a crowded college library. For one impossible moment, time collapsed like a house of cards, and he was 21 again, poor as dirt, but rich in possibilities, believing that love could conquer anything. Her lips parted slightly, and even though he couldn't hear her through the glass and the rain, he knew she'd just whispered his name. The same way she used to whisper it in the darkness, like a prayer, like a promise, like the answer to questions she didn't know she was asking. And that's when he knew there was no turning back. Whatever happened next, he couldn't drive away. He couldn't pretend he didn't see her. He couldn't spend another 23 years wondering what might have been. Because sometimes the universe gives you a second chance, but only if you're brave enough to get out of the car. James's hand finally found the courage to pull the door handle, and the sound of the rain immediately intensified, mixing with the urban symphony of distant traffic and the rapid thundering of his pulse. The October air cut through his tailored suit like it was made of paper, but he barely noticed the cold because every nerve ending was focused on the woman who was now staring at him like she was seeing a ghost. Which, in many ways, she was. Elena. Her name fell from his lips like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through 23 years of carefully maintained silence. He was standing now, the Bentley's door still open behind him, rain beginning to darken his Armani suit, but none of that mattered because she was looking at him with eyes that remembered everything. She dropped the rose she was arranging. It fell into a puddle at her feet, its red petals immediately darkening as they absorbed the dirty water, and something about that image of beauty damaged by neglect nearly brought him to his knees. James? His name came out as barely a whisper, carried away by the wind almost before he could catch it. But he'd been listening for that voice in his dreams for over 2 decades, so he heard it clearly. The way it still carried that slight tremor when she was overwhelmed, the way it still made his name sound like a song written just for him. He took a step forward, then another, until he was close enough to see the tiny lines around her eyes that weren't there when they were young and stupid and thought forever was guaranteed. Close enough to see that her hands were rough from work, her nails unpolished, her wedding ring finger conspicuously bare. Close enough to smell the faint scent of roses mixed with rain and something uniquely Elena that no amount of time could erase from his memory. "It's really you," she breathed, and there was wonder in her voice, but also something else. Something that might be pain or regret, or the same desperate longing that had been eating him alive since the day she chose to leave. "It's really me." The confirmation felt inadequate, but what else could he say? That he'd thought about this moment every day for 23 years. That he'd achieved everything he ever dreamed of and none of it meant anything without her. That seeing her here, like this, made him want to burn down his entire empire just to go back to when they were poor and happy and together. The rain was soaking through his jacket now, and he could see she was shivering, but neither of them moved. They were both frozen in this impossible moment, standing in the wreckage of their shared past while the present swirled around them like the storm. "You look," she started, then stopped, her gaze taking in his expensive clothes, the car idling behind him with its door still open like a portal to a different world. "You look successful." The word hit him like a slap because of how she said it, not with admiration or pride, but with a kind of resigned sadness that suggested success was the last thing she ever wanted for him if it meant losing everything else. Success is a relative term, he found himself saying, and immediately hated how pretentious it sounded. This was Elena, the woman who knew him when his biggest concern was whether he could afford ramen noodles for dinner. The woman who never needed him to be anything other than himself. She laughed, but it wasn't the musical laugh he remembered from lazy Sunday mornings in bed. This laugh was sharper, more brittle, like something that had been broken and never quite healed properly. Relative. Yes, I suppose it would be. The words created a chasm between them that felt wider than the years they'd spent apart. He wanted to reach across it, to touch her face, to promise that the man she loved was still here somewhere underneath all the layers of ambition and achievement and carefully calculated ruthlessness. But he wasn't sure that was true, and he'd never been able to lie to Elena. "What are you doing here?" The question escaped before he could stop it, and he immediately realized how it sounded not concerned, not curious, but accusatory, as if her presence on the street corner was somehow a personal affront to the life he'd built. Her chin lifted slightly, and there was the flash of fire he remembered, the stubborn pride that always appeared when anyone dared to question her choices. "I'm selling flowers. What does it look like?" "That's not what I meant." "Yes, it is." She bent down to retrieve the rose from the puddle, examining its damaged petals with the kind of careful attention she once reserved for his face when he was sick or sick, or simply lying beside her in the golden afternoon light. You meant, what is the woman who could have been rich doing selling flowers in the rain? The accuracy of her assessment stole his breath. Because yes, that's exactly what he meant, even if he didn't realize it. He'd been thinking of her all these years as the one who got away, but he'd also been thinking of her as the one who chose poorly, who let pride and fear rob her of the fortune he was destined to build. But looking at her now, at the gentle way she was trying to save a damaged flower, at the dignity she maintained despite circumstances that would humble most people, he realized he might have been wrong about who made the poor choice. "Elena, you should get back in your car," she interrupted, but her voice lacked conviction. "Your driver's probably wondering what's taking so long, and I have customers to serve." He glanced around the nearly empty street, where the only other signs of life were a homeless man seeking shelter under a distant awning and a stray cat darting between parked cars. "What customers?" She followed his gaze, and for a moment, her shoulders slumped slightly, the weight of pretending becoming too much to bear. "The ones who'll come. They always do, eventually." The quiet dignity in her voice nearly destroyed him. This was Elena at her most vulnerable, admitting that her hope might be misplaced but clinging to it anyway, because the alternative was unbearable. He remembered that quality from before, her ability to find light in the darkest places, to believe in happy endings even when all evidence suggested otherwise. It was the quality that once made him feel like he could conquer the world. And it was the quality that had been missing from his life ever since she left. "Come with me." The words exploded from his chest before his brain could filter them. Just for coffee. Just to get out of the rain. She looked at his car, then back at him, and he could practically see the war being fought behind her eyes. Want versus wisdom. The past versus the present. The woman she was versus the woman she'd had to become. "I can't just leave my flowers. I'll buy them all." The offer came out more desperate than generous. "Every single one." "Name your price." She stared at him for a long moment, and he realized he was holding his breath, waiting for her answer like his entire future depended on it. Which, perhaps it did, because standing there in the rain watching the woman he loved more than life itself count damaged roses, he finally understood what he lost when he let her walk away. And he was beginning to suspect that no amount of money, power, or success would ever be enough to fill that particular void. The question was it too late to try? Elena stared at James's offer like he'd just suggested something obscene, her dark eyes flashing with an emotion he couldn't quite identify. Anger? Hurt? Or maybe just the exhaustion that comes from years of carrying burdens too heavy for one person to bear alone. "You want to buy all my flowers." Her voice was flat, devoid of the warmth he once knew so well. "Just like that." Just like that. He tried to sound casual, as if he regularly purchased entire flower stands on random Tuesday afternoons, but the truth was his heart was hammering so hard he was surprised she couldn't hear it over the rain. She set down the damaged rose she'd been cradling and took a step back, putting more distance between them. It was a small movement, but it felt like a rejection of everything they'd ever been to each other. And what would that solve exactly? There was steel in her voice now, the kind of strength that comes from being tested by life and refusing to break. "You throw money at me, I disappear into your expensive car. And then what? We pretend the last 23 years never happened." The question hit him like a physical blow because he hadn't thought that far ahead. He saw her, recognized her, and every rational thought fled his brain like smoke in the wind. All he knew was that he needed to not lose her again, even if he wasn't sure what not losing her actually meant. "I don't know," he admitted, and the honesty surprised both of them. "I just know I can't drive away." Something flickered across her face, of surprise maybe at hearing him admit uncertainty. The James Hartwell she knew never confessed to not knowing something. He was always so sure of himself, so confident in his ability to figure things out, to make them work through sheer force of will and determination. But the James Hartwell never had to navigate seeing his first love selling flowers in the rain while he sat in a car worth more than most people's annual salary. "You can't drive away," she repeated slowly, as if testing the words for truth. "And yet you did. 23 years ago, you drove away just fine." The accusation landed like a knife between his ribs, precise and devastating. Because she was right, wasn't she? When she told him she couldn't marry him, couldn't follow him to New York, couldn't abandon her sick mother for his dreams of conquest, he did exactly what she was accusing him of now. He drove away. Literally. In that piece of shit Toyota Corolla with the broken air conditioning and the passenger door that wouldn't open, He drove away from everything that mattered and told himself it was her choice, her loss, her mistake. That was different, he said, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew how weak they sounded. Was it? She stepped closer now, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, the ones he used to trace with his finger while she slept. Close enough that he could see the scar above her left eyebrow from when she fell off her bike at age Savina's story. She told him during one of those endless conversations they used to have when the whole world felt like it belonged to just the two of them. I was 21, we were both 21. Her voice cut through his excuse like a blade. We were both scared. We were both being asked to choose between love and duty, between what we wanted and what we thought we owed other people. But only one of us decided that choice meant the other person didn't matter anymore. The words hung in the air between them like a challenge, and he realized this wasn't just about flowers or rain or chance encounters. This was about the fundamental question that had been haunting them both for over 2 decades. Who was the villain in their love story? He'd always cast her as the one who gave up, who chose the safe path over the adventure they could have shared. But standing here now, seeing the strength it took to survive whatever brought her to this street corner, he was beginning to understand that maybe his narrative was just another lie he told himself to make sleeping at night possible. Elena, you what? She wasn't going to make this easy, and honestly, he didn't deserve easy. You're sorry? You missed me? You thought about me while you were building your empire? All of those things were true, but saying them felt inadequate, like bringing a birthday candle to illuminate a cathedral. How could he explain that he thought about her every time he closed a deal, wondering if she'd be proud? How could he tell her that he kept her favorite song on every phone he'd owned, just in case he ever found the courage to call? How could he admit that every woman he'd dated since had been measured against a memory he'd spent over 2 decades trying to forget? I thought about calling, he said instead, which was both true and completely insufficient. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. When between board meetings, during hostile takeovers, while you were being photographed with socialites at charity galas. The last part hit especially hard because he knew she'd seen the pictures. In this age of social media and gossip sites, his life had been uncomfortably public, his romantic failures documented and analyzed by people who wouldn't know real love if it bit them on their surgically enhanced asses. Those photos, those women, they weren't me. She finished his sentence with a bitter smile. No, James, they weren't. They were beautiful and sophisticated and exactly the kind of women a billionaire is supposed to date. The kind who know which fork to use at state dinners and how to look stunning in designer gowns and never, ever sell flowers on street corners. The pain in her voice was so raw it made him physically flinch. Because she was right again, wasn't she? He did date those women not because he loved them, but because they fit the image of the life he thought he wanted. They were accessories to his success, beautiful and accomplished and completely interchangeable. Nothing like the woman standing before him, whose beauty was never about perfection but about the way she threw her head back when she laughed, the way she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating, the way she looked at him like he was already the man he was trying to become. Elena, those women, they were nothing. They meant nothing. And that's supposed to make me feel better. She shook her head, sending water droplets flying from her dark hair. That you spent 23 years dating women who meant nothing while she stopped abruptly, but he could fill in the blanks. While she what? While she raised a child alone, while she cared for her mother until the end, while she worked jobs that paid the bills but never quite enough to get ahead, while she built a life that had meaning even if it didn't have money. The silence stretched between them, heavy with all the words they were both afraid to say. Around them, the city continued its relentless pace, air splashing through puddles, pedestrians hurrying past with umbrellas bent against the wind, the distant wail of sirens mixing with the sound of his own labored breathing. Finally, she spoke, her voice so quiet he had to lean closer to hear it. Do you know what the worst part was? He shook his head, not trusting his voice. The worst part was that I kept believing you'd come back. Even after the first year, even after I heard you'd graduated, even after the engagement announcements and the business deals and all the proof that you'd moved on. I kept thinking that someday you'd remember what we had and realize it was worth fighting for. Her words hit him like a physical blow, doubling him over with a pain so sharp it stole his breath. Because she was describing the very thing he'd been afraid to admit even to himself, that deep down, in the part of his heart he'd never shown to anyone else, he'd been waiting for the same thing. Waiting for the courage to come back. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting for some cosmic sign that it wasn't too late to reclaim the only thing that ever truly mattered. And now here she was, standing in the rain selling flowers, and he realized that maybe the universe doesn't send signs. Maybe it just sends opportunities, and it's up to you to be brave enough to recognize them. But the question that had been torturing him for the last 10 minutes remained: was he too late? Had too many years passed, too many choices been made, too much damage been done for redemption to be possible? Looking at Elena now, at the way she was holding herself like someone preparing to be hurt again, he realized there was only one way to find out. He was going to have to tell her the truth. All of it, even the parts that made him look like the coward he'd spent decades pretending not to be. But first, they needed to get out of this rain before they both caught pneumonia and the conversation became moot. Elena. James said her name like a prayer, like an apology, like the beginning of a confession he should have made 23 years ago. There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago. She wrapped her arms around herself, a gesture so achingly familiar it transported him back to their tiny apartment, to nights when she'd hold herself the same way while talking about her fears, her dreams, the mother who needed her more than he did. Back then, he'd pull her into his arms and promise that everything would work out. Now, he was the one making her feel like she needed protection. What could you possibly need to tell me that matters now? But even as she asked, he could see the curiosity in her eyes, the same desire to understand that once made her listen to his wildest business ideas at 3 a.m. He took a breath that felt like swallowing glass. I got your letters. The words hung in the air between them like a bomb with the pin pulled out. Elena's face went completely still, so motionless she could be carved from marble, and he could practically hear the mechanisms of her mind trying to process what he'd just admitted. What letters? But her voice was barely a whisper, and they both knew she knew exactly what letters. All of them. The one you sent when your mother died. The one when you graduated from community college. The one when, he swallowed hard, when Sophie was born. Elena's knees buckled slightly, and she had to grab the edge of her flower cart to steady herself. The roses shook with the movement, their petals trembling like they were afraid of what came next. You got them, she repeated, and there was something devastating about the way she said it, like she was watching her entire understanding of the last 2 decades crumble into dust. You got them and I never responded, I never called, I never came back. He was confessing now, and each word felt like pulling out his own teeth. I read every single one, Elena. I memorized them. I kept them in a safe in my office because they were the most valuable things I owned. She was staring at him like he was a stranger, like the man she once loved had been replaced by someone wearing his face. Why? The word came out as a sob. Why would you do that to me? Why would you let me keep writing to someone who was never going to answer? And here it was, the moment of truth that he'd been dreading and needing in equal measure. The explanation that would either damn him forever or maybe offer a path towards something resembling redemption. Because I was a coward. The admission tore out of him like a confession at gunpoint. Because every letter made me want to come back, and I was terrified that if I did, I'd never become the man I thought you deserved. The man I deserved. Elena's voice rose, cracking with emotion. James, I never asked you to become anyone other than who you were. I loved you exactly as you were, broke, ambitious, scared, wonderful you. The man I deserved was the one who would have gotten on a plane when my mother was dying instead of reading about it in a letter and filing it away like a business document. The accuracy of her words hit him like a physical blow. Because that's exactly what he did, isn't it? He treated her letters like intelligence reports from a world he'd left behind, reading them for information but never allowing them to move him to action. I thought I was protecting you, he said, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew how inadequate they sounded. Protecting me from what? From the man I was becoming. He was struggling now, trying to explain 23 years of rationalization and self-deception. From the choices I was making, the people I was hurting, the parts of myself I was selling off piece by piece to build something I thought would matter. Elena stepped closer, and for the first time since they'd been standing here, she looked less like a stranger and more like the woman who once knew every secret in his heart. And what did you build, James? What was worth more than love? What was worth more than being there when the people who mattered needed you? He wanted to list his achievements like a resume of companies, the deals, the fortune that could buy small countries. But standing here in the rain, watching the woman he loved more than breathing sell flowers to survive, all of those accomplishments felt as substantial as smoke. Nothing, he whispered, and the admission nearly brought him to his knees. I built nothing that mattered. I built a fortune and lost my soul. I built an empire and lived in it alone. The rain was coming down harder now, turning the street into a river of reflected neon and broken dreams. Elena's thin jacket was soaked through, and she was shivering, but she didn't move, didn't suggest they seek shelter. It was like she knew this conversation could only happen here, in the rain, with nothing between them but truth and time and the weight of all their mistakes. "Sophie," she said suddenly, and the name hit him like a lightning bolt. "You knew about Sophie, and you never I wanted to." The words exploded from him with desperate urgency. "God, Elena, you have no idea how many times I picked up the phone, how many planes I almost boarded, how many letters I started and never sent because I didn't know how to explain where I'd been or why it took me so long to remember what mattered." "She's 22 now," Elena said, and there was something in her voice that made his chest tighten. "She graduated from college last month. Art therapy. She wants to help kids who've been through trauma." The pride in Elena's voice was unmistakable, and it occurred to him that while he was building his empire of money and power, she was building something infinitely more valuable, a human being who wanted to heal the world instead of conquering it. "She sounds incredible," he said, and meant it. "She is." Elena's smile was soft, the first genuinely happy expression he'd seen from her since he got out of the car. "She's everything I could have hoped for and more." But James, the pause stretched between them like a chasm. "She's not yours." The words hit him like a physical blow, even though he already knew. The timeline never made sense, and Elena was never the type to lie about something so important. But hearing it confirmed felt like losing something he never actually had. "I know," he said quietly. "I figured that out. But Elena, it wouldn't have mattered. If you had let me, I would have loved her like she was mine." And that's when Elena finally broke. The composure she'd maintained throughout this entire surreal encounter finally cracked, and tears began streaming down her face, mixing with the rain until he couldn't tell where her grief ended, and the storm began. "That's what you don't understand," she sobbed. "I didn't want you to love her out of obligation or guilt or some misplaced sense of duty. I wanted you to love her because you loved me enough to come back. I wanted you to choose us, not resign yourself to us." The distinction hit him like a revelation, illuminating years of his own flawed thinking. Because yes, that's exactly what he would have done. He would have returned out of duty, not joy. He would have seen Sophie as a responsibility to shoulder, not a gift to treasure. He would have tried to be noble instead of happy, sacrificial instead of grateful. And Elena, who knew him better than. He knew himself, recognized that, and protected her daughter from it. "I was such a fool," he whispered. "We both were." Elena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving streaks in the rain on her cheeks. "I was a fool for believing you'd figure out what mattered before it was too late. You were a fool for thinking success was worth more than love." The past tense of her statement terrified him. "Elena, is it too late, I mean?" She looked at him for a long moment, and he could see her weighing his question against 23 years of experience. Against every letter he never answered. Against every birthday and Christmas and milestone he missed while building his monument to ambition. "I don't know," she said finally, and somehow her uncertainty felt more hopeful than any definitive answer could have. "I honestly don't know." But the fact that she was still standing here, still talking to him, still allowing this conversation to continue despite everything he'd done and failed to do, suggested that maybe the story wasn't over yet. Maybe it was just finally ready to begin. The rain showed no signs of stopping, and they were both soaked to the bone now, standing in what felt like the epicenter of their own personal hurricane. Elena's flower cart was taking a beating, the roses drooping under the weight of the water, their vibrant colors bleeding into the puddles at their feet like liquid heartbreak. "We can't keep standing out here," James said, though part of him was terrified that if they moved, if they broke this spell, Elena would disappear like smoke in the wind, and he'd spend the rest of his life wondering if this entire encounter was just an elaborate dream. She followed his gaze to her flowers, and he could see the calculation in her eye show much money she was losing with every minute they weren't being sold. How many bills this day's failure would leave unpaid. It was a kind of math he hadn't had to do in decades, and the reminder of how different their worlds had become hit him like a slap. "Elena," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her look up. "Come with me, please. Just for an hour. Just until the rain stops. I can't afford to lose a whole day's sales, I'll cover it." The offer came out more businesslike than he intended, but he couldn't seem to help himself. Solving problems with money had become second nature, even when the problem was his own desperate longing. Whatever you would have made today, plus the cost of the flowers. Consider it a consulting fee. Elena's eyes flashed with something that might be anger. A consulting fee. For what? For helping me figure out how to stop being the kind of man who thinks every problem can be solved with a check. The honesty of his answer surprised both of them. Elena stared at him for a long moment, and he could practically see her internal debate pride warring with practicality, past hurts wrestling with present possibilities. Finally, she nodded toward a small coffee shop across the street, its windows glowing warm and golden against the gray afternoon. 1 hour, she said. But I'm buying my own coffee. It was such a small assertion of independence, but it told him everything he needed to know about who Elena had become in the years since he knew her. This was not a woman who would be bought or rescued or swept away by grand gestures. This was a woman who had learned to save herself, one small decision at a time. They worked together to cover the flowers with a plastic tarp she produced from beneath the cart, their hands brushing as they secured it against the wind. The contact sent electricity shooting up his arm. And from the way Elena's breath caught, he knew she felt it too, that undeniable chemistry that time and distance and 23 years of separate lives hadn't managed to kill. Marcus was still waiting patiently in the Bentley, and James approached the driver's window with Elena beside him. His eyebrows rose almost imperceptibly when he saw her, but he was too professional to ask questions. "Give me an hour," James told him. "Maybe 2. Certainly, sir. Shall I wait here?" James looked at Elena's flower cart, then at the coffee shop, calculating the logistics of keeping both secure while they attempted to navigate the most important conversation of his life. "Actually, keep an eye on the flowers, would you? Make sure nobody bothers them." Marcus nodded, though James could see the question in his eyes. In 8 years of driving him around, Marcus had never been asked to guard a street vendor's merchandise. But Marcus was nothing if not adaptable, and within moments he was repositioning the car to give him a clear view of Elena's corner. The coffee shop was one of those aggressively hip places with exposed brick walls and baristas who took their craft more seriously than some surgeons take heart transplants. James ordered a black coffee. Elena asked for tea with honey, and they found a table in the corner where they could watch each other without being observed by curious strangers. For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of 23 years settling between them like an uninvited guest. James studied Elena's face in the warm light, cataloging the changes time had wrought, the lines around her eyes that spoke of worry and laughter in equal measure, the silver threads in her dark hair that caught the light like spun moonbeams, the way her hands wrapped around her mug as if seeking warmth from more than just the tea. She was still beautiful, but it was a different kind of beauty than the one that had captured his heart in college. This was beauty earned through struggle, refined by loss, deepened by the kind of experiences that either break a person or forge them into something stronger. "You're staring," Elena said quietly, not looking up from her tea. "I'm remembering," he replied, and it was the truth. He was remembering the way she used to curl up in the corner of their second-hand couch, always choosing the spot where the afternoon light fell just right. He was remembering how she'd hum while cooking dinner, creating elaborate meals from whatever they could afford. He was remembering the way she'd trace patterns on his back when he couldn't sleep, worried about exams or job interviews, or the thousand small fears that seemed so insignificant now. "What are you remembering?" She looked up then, and he caught a glimpse of the curiosity that had always been one of her most endearing qualities. "Everything," he said simply. "The good parts. Anyway, I've gotten very good at remembering only the good parts." "And what about the bad parts?" James considered this, swirling his coffee absently. "I convinced myself there weren't any bad parts. That everything that went wrong was your fault for not coming with me, or my father's fault for being a bastard, or just bad luck. It was easier than admitting I might have been wrong about what mattered." Elena was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was softer than it had been since they sat down. "There were bad parts, James. We fought about money constantly. You worked 18-hour days and came home exhausted and frustrated. I was terrified you were going to burn out before you even got started. We were both so young and so seared and so sure we knew better than everyone else. But we were happy," he said, and it came out like a question. "We were happy," she confirmed, and something in his chest loosened at her words. "Even when we were broke and stressed and living off ramen noodles, we were happy. That's what made it so hard when everything fell apart." James leaned back in his chair, the familiar ache of old regret settling in his chest like an unwelcome guest. "Tell me about after," he said. "After I left. I know some of it from the letters, but," Elena's hands tightened around her mug, "you want me to fill in the gaps in your intelligence reports." The accusation stung because it was fair. "I want to know if you were okay. If you found happiness." She was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully neutral, as if she was reading from someone else's story. Mom lasted another 18 months after you left. The cancer came back worse than before. I dropped out of school to take care of her full-time. She paused, took a sip of tea. I met David about 6 months after the funeral. He was kind, patient. He didn't mind that I was broken. James felt his jaw clench involuntarily. David, Sophie's father. Elena's voice carried a warmth that hit him like a physical blow. He was a teacher at the elementary school where I worked in the office. He used to bring me coffee during my break, never expected anything in return. It took him 8 months to work up the courage to ask me out. The image of another man courting Elena, of someone else learning her coffee preferences and making her smile, was almost unbearable. But James forced himself to ask what happened to him. Car accident when Sophie was 3. Elena's voice went flat, and James realized he was looking at a woman who had lost everyone she'd ever loved except her daughter. Drunk driver ran a red light. David was coming home from a parent-teacher conference. Jesus, Elena, I'm so sorry, she shrugged, but he could see the old pain flickering behind her eyes. Life happens. You deal with it, or you don't. I had Sophie to think about. But that means you've been alone for 19 years. She met his gaze steadily. 19 years of figuring out how to be everything to everyone. Mother, father, provider, protector. 19 years of making every decision alone, carrying every burden alone, celebrating every victory alone. The weight of what she was describing hit him like a sledgehammer. While he was building his empire, attending galas, being photographed with beautiful women who meant nothing, Elena was working double shifts and helping with homework and going to school plays alone and lying awake at night worrying about college tuition and medical bills and whether she was enough. Why didn't you remarry? The question slipped out before he could stop it, and he immediately regretted the presumption behind it. Elena's laugh was sharp. Because I was damaged goods, a widow with a young child and no money? Or because I was still hung up on the man who never wrote me back? Which one was it? She considered this, turning her mug in slow circles on the table. Both. Neither. I dated a few times over the years, but it never went anywhere. Sophie always came first, and most men aren't interested in playing second fiddle to someone else's child. And she paused, seeming to wrestle with something. I suppose I never got over the feeling that I'd already had my great love story, that everything else would just be settling. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. James felt something dangerous unfurling in his chest, hope, maybe, or just the devastating recognition of time wasted and chances squandered. Elena, don't. She held up a hand, stopping him before he could say whatever foolish thing was about to tumble out of his mouth. I don't make this about us. This is about me telling you why I'm selling flowers on a street corner, instead of living in some suburban paradise with a husband and a white picket fence. Okay, he said quietly. Tell me. She took a deep breath as if gathering courage for a difficult confession. After David died, I went back to school, got my degree in social work. I wanted to help other single mothers, other families dealing with loss. I was good at it, James. Really good. I had my own office, a decent salary, health insurance. For about 10 years, we were okay. Not rich, but stable. What changed? The economy tanked. Budget cuts. My department was eliminated. And suddenly I was 50 years old competing for jobs with people half my age who would work for half the salary. She paused, staring into her tea like it might hold answers. I went through my savings, keeping us afloat while I looked for work. Then Sophie needed money for college, and I refinanced the house, took out loans, did everything I could to make sure she could follow her dreams. And now the house is underwater. The loans are in default. I'm working 3 part-time jobs that barely cover the minimum payments and selling flowers on the street for extra cash because I'm too proud to declare bankruptcy and too old to start over again. The matter-of-fact way she delivered this litany of hardships was almost worse than if she'd been crying. This was a woman who had been beaten down by circumstances beyond her control but refused to be broken by them. My God, Elena, why didn't you? He stopped himself because he knew what he'd been about to say. Why didn't you call me? Why didn't you ask for help? And they both knew the answer to that. Why didn't I swallow my pride and beg the man who ignored my letters for 23 years to rescue me? She smiled, but there was no humor in it. Because I'd rather sell flowers in the rain than give you the satisfaction of being right about me. Right about you how? That I should have chosen you. That I should have followed you to New York and let my mother die alone so I could live in luxury as the wife of a billionaire. Her voice was rising now, drawing curious glances from other patrons. That I made the wrong choice and spent the rest of my life paying for it. James felt something crack open inside his chest. Elena, I never thought yes, you did. She leaned forward, her eyes blazing with 23 years of suppressed anger. You thought it every time you closed a deal or bought a new car or had your picture taken at some charity event. You thought about how different things could have been if I'd just been smart enough to bet on the winning horse. You're wrong. The words came out stronger than he intended, and Elena sat back slightly, surprised by his vehemence. You want to know what I thought about? I thought about how I was becoming exactly the kind of man I swore I'd never be. I thought about how my father would be proud of the money and disgusted by everything I'd sacrificed to get it. I thought about how you were the only person who ever believed I could be successful without becoming a monster, and how losing you was proof that I'd already become one. The anger drained out of Elena's face, replaced by something that might have been surprise or recognition or just exhaustion. I thought about you every single day, James continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Not because I thought you'd made the wrong choice, but because I was terrified I had. The coffee shop buzzed with the quiet energy of afternoon conversations and the gentle hiss of the espresso machine. But at their corner table, time seemed suspended. Elena stared at James across the small space between them, and he could see her processing his words, weighing them against decades of assumptions and carefully constructed defenses. You were terrified you'd made the wrong choice, she repeated slowly, but you kept making it. Every day for 23 years. Because I didn't know how to unmake it. James ran his hands through his hair, a gesture she remembered from when he was overwhelmed. Because by the time I realized what I'd lost, I'd built this life that everyone expected me to live. Shareholders, employees, the media, everyone had an investment in James Hartwell, the billionaire. Nobody gave a damn about Jimmy Hart, who used to dream about opening a small consulting firm with the woman he loved. Elena's eyes widened slightly. You remember that? Of course I remember. Hart Associates. We were going to specialize in helping small businesses navigate the digital transition. You were going to handle the people side, I was going to do the technical implementation. We had it all mapped out on that whiteboard in our kitchen. You wanted to call it Hart Elena Enterprises, she said softly, and James could hear the smile in her voice even if he couldn't see it. I told you that was terrible branding. You were right. You were always right about the practical stuff. He paused, studying her face. What happened to that dream, Elena? Not just Manower's. What happened to the woman who wanted to change the world one small business at a time? Elena was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the table that reminded him of the way she used to trace patterns on his skin. She got practical. She learned that dreams are a luxury you can't afford when people depend on you. But Sophie's grown now. She's out of college, starting her own life. And I'm 53 years old with no savings, no retirement plan, and a credit score that makes me a financial pariah. Elena's voice was matter-of-fact, but James could hear the underlying pain. It's a little late to start chasing dreams. Is it? James leaned forward, and for the first time since they'd sat down, he allowed himself to really look at her, not the successful businessman calculating angles and opportunities, but the man who had once believed anything was possible as long as they faced it together. Elena, what if it's not too late? What if this moment, this completely insane, impossible moment is actually the universe giving us a second chance? She laughed, but it was hollow. A second chance at what? You want me to be your kept woman? Your charity case? Your midlife crisis made flesh? I want you to be my partner. The words came out with such intensity that several people at nearby tables turned to look. James lowered his voice but didn't break eye contact. I want to tear down everything I've built and start over. Together. The way we should have done it the first time. Elena stared at him like he just suggested they run away to join the circus. James, you're not thinking clearly. You're having some kind of emotional breakdown because seeing me brought back old memories. In a week, you'll come to your senses and realize you have a life, responsibilities, obligations. I have money, he interrupted. I have power. I have influence. But I don't have a life, Elena. I have an existence. I have a carefully orchestrated performance that I put on every day for people who would forget my name the moment I stopped being useful to them. So what are you suggesting? That we pretend 23 years didn't happen? That we just pick up where we left off like nothing changed? No. James reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her hand. I'm suggesting we acknowledge that 23 years did happen. That we're both different people than we were. That we both made choices that seemed right at the time but led us to places we never wanted to be. And I'm suggesting that maybe it's not too late to make different choices. Elena looked down at his hand, so close to hers that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. What kind of different choices? James took a deep breath, knowing that what he was about to say would sound insane to anyone listening, but knowing equally that it was the sanest thing he'd considered in decades. I want to sell everything. The company, the houses, the cars, the art collection, all of it. I want to take that money and start something that matters. A foundation maybe focused on helping people who are struggling the way you've been struggling. Single parents, widows, people who fell through the cracks of the system I helped build. Elena's eyes had grown wide, and James could see her trying to process the magnitude of what he was suggesting. And I want you to run it with me, he continued. Not as my employee, not as someone I'm rescuing, but as my equal partner. Because you know things I never learned: how to survive when everything falls apart, how to find hope when hope seems impossible, how to build a life that has meaning even when it doesn't have money. James, that's insane. I know. Impractical. I know that too. But Elena, I've spent 20 years being practical, and it nearly killed everything good inside me. I don't want to be practical anymore. I want to be brave. I want to be the man you believed I could be before I convinced myself that success was more important than soul. Elena was quiet for so long that James began to wonder if he'd finally said something so ridiculous that she was planning her escape route. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Why now? Why today? Why not 5 years ago or 10 or 20? Because 5 years ago I was still lying to myself about what mattered. Because 10 years ago I was still convinced that if I just made enough money, acquired enough power, I could somehow earn my way back to happiness. Because 20 years ago I was too much of a coward to admit I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. And what changed? James smiled, and for the first time in years, it felt genuine. I saw you selling flowers in the rain, and I realized that I'd rather be broke and happy with you than rich and miserable without you. I realized that all the money in the world can't buy back the years we've lost, but maybe, just maybe, it could give us a chance to make the years we have left count for something. Elena's eyes filled with tears, and James held his breath, waiting for her response. Everything he'd built, everything he'd become, everything he'd convinced himself mattered hung in the balance of this moment. I'm scared, she whispered finally. So am I, he admitted. Terrified, actually. But Elena, what if being scared together is better than being safe alone? Elena wiped her eyes with a napkin, leaving small flecks of paper on her cheeks that James wanted desperately to brush away. Around them, the coffee shop continued its afternoon rhythm: students typing on laptops, business people conducting meetings, couples sharing quiet conversations, but their corner felt separate from all of it, like they were suspended in a bubble where only truth was allowed. You know what the really crazy part is? Elena said, her voice still shaky from unshed tears. For about 30 seconds there, I actually believed you. Elena, no, let me finish. She held up a hand, and James could see her rebuilding her defenses in real time. For 30 seconds, I let myself imagine what it would be like to say yes, to trust you again, to believe that this time might be different. And you know what I realized? James shook his head, afraid to speak. I realized that I've been protecting myself so long, I've forgotten how to live. I've been so focused on surviving, on making sure Sophie had what she needed, on proving that I could make it on my own, that I forgot about the part of me that used to dream big dreams and believe in impossible things. That part is still there, James said quietly. I can see it. It's what drew me to you in the first place. And it's what I see when you talk about Sophie, when you smile at something that genuinely makes you happy. It's not gone, Elena. It's just buried under a lot of disappointment and practical necessity. She laughed, but it sounded more like crying. You want to know what I was thinking about this morning when I was setting up my cart? I was thinking about how David used to say that everything happens for a reason. How even the worst things in life serve some purpose in the grand design. Do you believe that? I used to. After you left, I convinced myself that losing you was supposed to teach me something about self-reliance. After David died, I told myself that becoming a single mother was supposed to make me stronger. After I lost my job, I decided that struggling financially was supposed to humble me, make me more empathetic. She paused, staring into the depths of her tea. But lately I've been wondering if sometimes things just happen. If sometimes there's no grand plan, no hidden purpose. If sometimes you're just a woman selling flowers in the rain because life kicked you in the teeth one too many times. And now? Elena looked up at him, and James could see the war being fought behind her eyes. Now I'm wondering if maybe David was right. Maybe everything that happened, all the loss, all the struggle, all the years of learning how to survive, maybe it was all preparing me for this moment, for this choice. What choice? Whether to trust you again, whether to believe that someone who broke my heart once won't do it again, whether to risk everything I built, small and fragile as it is, on the possibility that you've really changed. James felt his heart hammering against his ribs. And what are you leaning toward? Elena was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was steady but soft. I'm leaning toward telling you about Sophie. The non sequitur caught him off guard. What about her? She's been asking about you. Elena's words hit him like a physical blow. Not by name, obviously. She doesn't know your name. But she's been asking about her mother's first love, the man who got away. She's been asking why I never remarried, why I always seem to be waiting for something that never comes. What do you tell her? I tell her that sometimes love is complicated. That sometimes the right person comes into your life at the wrong time, or the wrong person comes at the right time, and you have to make impossible choices with incomplete information. Elena paused, wrapping her hands more tightly around her mug. I tell her that her father was a good man who loved us both completely, and that sometimes that has to be enough. But it wasn't enough, was it? Elena shook her head slowly. David was wonderful. Kind, patient, devoted. He was everything a woman should want in a husband. But James, he wasn't you. The admission hung between them like a confession, raw and honest and devastating in its simplicity. I loved him, Elena continued, and James could hear the guilt in her voice. I really did. But I was never in love with him the way I was in love with you. He knew it too, though we never talked about it directly. It was just there, this understanding that he was getting the part of me that was left after the fire burned out. Elena, I'm sorry. I'm so goddamn sorry for what my leaving cost you. It wasn't just your leaving, she said, and there was something like forgiveness in her voice. It was my staying, my choosing duty over desire, security over adventure. I made that choice, James. You didn't make it for me. But if I had stayed, if you had stayed, we probably would have been broke and struggling and fighting about money and watching my mother die slowly while you resented having to put your dreams on hold. Elena's voice was gentle but firm. We were kids, James. We didn't know anything about love or sacrifice or what it really means to build a life with someone. Maybe we needed to live the lives we lived to become the people we are now. And who are we now? Elena considered this, studying his face like she was seeing him for the first time. You're a man who built an empire but lost his soul, and now you're trying to figure out if it's possible to buy it back. I'm a woman who learned how to survive anything but forgot how to truly live. We're both standing at a crossroads wondering if we have the courage to choose a different path. Do we? I don't know. Elena's honesty was both heartbreaking and hopeful. But I know I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of protecting myself from possibilities because they might not work out. I'm tired of selling flowers in the rain when I could be helping people rebuild their lives. James felt something like hope unfurling in his chest. Does that mean? It means I want to meet your Marcus. Elena's smile was small but genuine. And I want to know more about this foundation idea of yours. And I want to understand what you're really offering, not the fantasy version where we ride off into the sunset, but the practical reality of two middle-aged people trying to figure out if they can build something meaningful together. We can start slow, James said, and he could hear the eagerness in his own voice. Dinner tomorrow night. Somewhere quiet where we can talk about specifics. I'll have my lawyers draw up a formal proposal for the foundation, something you can review and modify. We'll do this right, Elena, like partners, like equals. And if it doesn't work out, if we try and fail, James reached across the table and finally touched her hand. Her skin was warm and slightly rough from work, and the contact sent electricity shooting through his entire nervous system. Then we fail together, he said simply. And that will still be better than succeeding alone. Elena didn't pull her hand away, and James took that as the first real sign of hope he'd felt in over 2 decades. Outside, the rain was finally beginning to ease. They sat like that for several minutes, her hand in his, both of them marveling at the simple miracle of skin touching skin, after so many years of imagined contact. Around them, the coffee shop had grown quieter as the afternoon crowd thinned, leaving behind the die-hard caffeine addicts and people like them who weren't ready to return to the world yet. I should check on my flowers, Elena said finally, though she made no move to withdraw her hand. Marcus will have scared away any potential thieves by now, James replied, running his thumb along her knuckles in a gesture that felt both completely natural and utterly foreign. He has that effect on people. Is he the large, intimidating type? He's the polite, professional type, who happens to be built like a linebacker and drives a car that costs more than most people's houses. People tend to give him a wide berth. Elena laughed, and the sound was so much like the laugh he remembered that it hit him in the chest like a physical force. I can't believe you have a driver named Marcus who protects flower carts. My life has officially entered the realm of the surreal. Your life, James said, finally understanding something that had been nagging at him since he first spotted her on the street corner. Elena, this isn't your life. Selling flowers, struggling to pay bills, working 3 jobs, this is what you're doing to survive. But it's not who you are. She tilted her head, curious. Who am I, then? You're the woman who organized a campus-wide food drive because you noticed the kid in your statistics class never ate lunch. You're the person who convinced our landlord to let us pay rent a week late by baking him cookies and listening to him complain about his ex-wife for 2 hours. You're someone who sees problems and fixes them, who finds solutions everyone else missed, who makes people feel heard and valued and important. Elena's eyes filled with tears again, but these seemed different, less painful, more like recognition. I'd forgotten about the food drive. You collected enough donations to feed half the student body for a month. And when it was over, you convinced the administration to make it an annual thing. For all I know, it's still happening. You remember that? I remember everything about you, Ina. Every kindness, every brilliant idea, every moment when you saw a way to make the world a little bit better. James paused, squeezing her hand gently. That's who I want as my partner. Not because you need rescuing, but because the world needs what you have to offer. Elena wiped her eyes with her free hand, smearing her mascara slightly. You're trying to seduce me with my own Russum. Is it working? Maybe a little. She smiled, and it was the first completely unguarded expression he'd seen from her all day. But James, you need to understand something. I'm not the idealistic 21-year-old who thought she could change the world through sheer force of will. I've been beaten down by reality. I've learned that good intentions don't pay bills, that kindness doesn't guarantee kindness in return, that sometimes trying to help people just makes things worse. And I've learned that money without purpose is just elaborate scorekeeping, James replied. That power without compassion is just glorified bullying. That all the success in the world means nothing if you don't have someone to share it with. So what are we saying? That our individual failures make us a good team. I'm saying that maybe our individual lessons make us a complete team. You know how to survive when everything goes wrong. I know how to build something from nothing. You understand people and their needs. I understand systems and how to navigate them. Together, we might actually be able to do some good. Elena was quiet for a moment, and James could see her mind working, analyzing the possibilities, weighing the risks against the potential rewards. It was the same expression she used to get when she was working through a complex problem, and seeing it again made his heart ache with nostalgic longing. Tell me about the foundation idea, she said finally. Not the romantic fantasy version, but the actual nuts and bolts reality. What would it look like? How would it work? What would my role be? James felt a surge of excitement that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with the pure joy of planning something meaningful with someone who understood the vision. Okay, he said, leaning forward and unconsciously falling into the focused, energetic mode that had once characterized their late-night planning sessions. The way I see it, we'd focus on people who are struggling through no fault of their own. Single parents, widows, people who lost jobs due to economic downturns, families dealing with medical bankruptcy, the kind of situations where traditional charity just puts a band-aid on a systemic problem. So not just giving people money, he confirmed. Money without support often just postpones the inevitable. Instead, we'd provide comprehensive assistance. Financial counseling, job training, child care support, legal aid, whatever someone needs to get back on their feet permanently. Elena's eyes were bright with interest now, and James could see the woman who once dreamed of changing the world stirring back to life. That would require massive infrastructure, she said. Social workers, counselors, trainers, administrators. You're talking about essentially creating a parallel social services system. I'm talking about creating the social services system that should exist but doesn't. Elena, I've seen what happens when you have unlimited resources but no understanding of what people actually need. I've also seen what you've accomplished with limited resources but deep understanding of the problems. Imagine what we could do with both. It would take years to set up properly. We have years. It would cost millions. I have millions. It would fail sometimes. We'd pour resources into people who'd squander them or situations that couldn't be fixed. And we'd succeed sometimes too. We'd change lives, save families, give people hope when they thought hope was gone. James paused, studying her face. Elena, what if failure isn't the worst possible outcome? What if the worst outcome is never trying at all? She stared at him for a long moment, and he could see the exact moment when her last wall of resistance crumbled. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. Her shoulders relaxed, her breathing deepened, and something that might have been hope flickered to life in her eyes. I have conditions, she said finally. Name them. First, this isn't about us getting back together romantically. This is about building something meaningful professionally. If something personal develops naturally over time, fine, but that's not the goal here. Agreed. Though James felt a stab of disappointment, he also recognized the wisdom in her approach. They needed to rebuild trust before they could rebuild love. Second, I'm not your employee. I'm your partner. Equal decision-making power, equal compensation, equal respect. Absolutely. Third, Sophie gets to meet you before I commit to anything long-term. If she doesn't approve, if she's uncomfortable with my working with you, then it's off the table. I'd be honored to meet her. And fourth, Elena paused, seeming to gather courage for this last condition. If we do this, we do it right. No half measures, no holding back, no safety nets. We commit completely to making it work, both professionally and personally. Because I can't survive having my heart broken by you twice. James felt the weight of her words settle over him like a sacred obligation. She was asking for everything: his trust, his commitment, his promise that this time would be different. And despite every rational voice in his head screaming about the risks, he knew there was only one answer he could give. Elena, he said, raising her hand to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles, I promise you that this time I'm here to stay. Outside, the rain had stopped completely, and weak afternoon sunlight was beginning to filter through the clouds. The transformation began immediately, though neither of them recognized it as such at the time. They were simply two people walking back across a rain-slicked street, returning to a flower cart that had somehow become the catalyst for rebuilding their entire lives. Marcus was indeed standing guard over Elena's roses, his imposing figure creating a small zone of respectability around her makeshift business. He nodded respectfully as they approached, and James could see him taking Elena's measure with the professional discretion of someone who had learned to assess people quickly and accurately. Everything secure, sir, Marcus reported, though his eyes remained on Elena. A few people inquired about purchasing flowers, but I explained that the proprietor would return shortly. Thank you, Marcus. James turned to Elena, who was staring at her cart with an expression he couldn't quite read. What is it? I'm just realizing that this might be the last day I do this, she said quietly. The last day I stand on a street corner hoping people will buy my flowers. It feels significant somehow. We don't have to decide everything today, James said gently. We can take this as slowly as you need. Elena shook her head. No, that's not what I mean. I mean, look at them. She gestured to the roses, most of which had survived the storm better than expected. Yesterday, these flowers were just a way to make a few extra dollars. Today, they're the reason we found each other again. Tomorrow, they'll just be flowers again. It's strange how things can be ordinary and miraculous. At the same time, James understood exactly what she meant. What do you want to do with them? Elena considered this, running her fingers along the petals of a particularly vibrant red rose. I want to give them away. All of them. To anyone who wants one. Are you sure? I'm sure. She looked up at him with a smile that was part nostalgic sadness, part hopeful anticipation. I want to end this chapter of my life with an act of generosity instead of necessity. And so they did. For the next hour, James Hartwell, billionaire CEO, master of the universe, man whose time was literally worth thousands of dollars per minute, stood on a street corner, helping the woman he loved give away flowers to strangers. They gave roses to the homeless man who had been sheltering under the awning, to a young couple walking hand in hand, to a harried mother pushing a stroller, to a businessman who looked like he needed a reminder that beauty still existed in the world. With each flower they distributed, Elena seemed to shed another layer of the protective armor she'd built around herself over the years. Do you know what I love about this? She said as they handed the last rose to a little girl, whose face lit up like Christmas morning. What? We're not trying to solve anyone's problems. We're not changing their lives or fixing their situations. We're just giving them something beautiful for no reason other than that everyone deserves something beautiful. James watched the little girl skip away, clutching her rose like a treasure, and felt something shift inside his chest. Elena looked at him, the faintest smile touching her lips. One rose at a time, she said softly. Small enough to matter. Small enough to keep going. James felt something settle in his chest, not the rush of a deal closed, but the steadiness of knowing you're exactly where you're meant to be. The rain had stopped now, and the city lights reflected off the wet pavement like scattered gold. They walked back to the car together, side by side, saying nothing more. Some beginnings don't need words, just the courage to take the first step. And as the Bentley pulled away from the curb, James knew this wasn't ending at all. It was the very start of the only deal that had ever truly mattered. Because sometimes the biggest change starts when you're brave enough to stop.